Mike Exeter, great to see you. Thank you for coming to chat with us about all things heaviness related.
Pleasure to be here, thank you.
And on that subject, I know it's a really broad question, but how do you define heaviness?
Well, I always think any of these descriptions come from a comparison point of view. So the whole yin and the yang of the universe, etc., is heavy is defined by what precedes it and what comes after it. So for me, I mean, there was a meme that went out a few years ago, which was just the gravitational force of a black hole, and then the gravitational force of one of Iommi's riffs. And I know which one's heavier. I would say, for me, one of the greatest emotional changes in a heavy piece of music is Children of the Grave, where it goes from the sort of the shuffly ding 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 into the middle section, where it just gets so heavy and big, and it goes into the tritone, and it's like that's the juxtaposition. It's like it's the how it goes from light to dark, and whatever brings that emotional resonance to the heaviness, the majesty. It's like with classical stuff, you've got emotive heaviness, you've got actual, big heaviness of an orchestra, but you can also have the space, and something just does, after this long period of quiet space, you can just have something that takes you to a different place, and that can be heavy. So I think it's just how you emotionally react to it.
So obviously you feel there's different forms of heaviness. You mentioned classical music, and that's an interesting concept about what comes before and what comes after it, that a shout becomes not as loud if it's just a continual shout. But if you get a whisper, then a shout, then that dynamic changes. But what forms of heaviness do you feel there are from both performative and production perspectives? Again, it's a really broad question. But
I mean, to me, it's always that comparison. It's like there is no heavy without light. So from a performance point of view, it's maybe choosing, for a drummer, choosing to go from a slow ride cymbal beat to then going to low toms, and that creates a heaviness both in note choice of the toms and what you can do with rooms. If something gets a bit quick, I don't equate speed with heavy. I equate that with energy. That's the change in energy that evokes a different kind of reaction that sort of makes you feel, whereas the heaviness is just it's that thing for me. So from a performance point of view, it's kind of it's related to that, and that comes from the writing. It's like and the arrangement. What are you trying to achieve? What are you pulling these people along in this journey? So again, because I watch lots of movie stuff, you take the journey of the 10-hour plus thing of Lord of the Rings. You take that change in emotive storytelling and narrative. By the end of the third movie, you're at this point where it has got so dark and heavy, you just want this thing to end because it's painful. And that's the heaviness in the emotional response to what's being shown to you. You're living this story with the characters. And I think music can do that. I think music has a big part in dragging you along this timeline.
So a lot about the performance and the composition of the actual songs then. From more taking the performance and the compositions and capturing that and delivering it to the listener, you've obviously had great experience from engineering all the way, Black Sabbath, Tony Iommi, through to more contemporary metal such as Cradle of Filth. There's obviously different forms of heaviness and different speeds and performance subdivisions as we've already spoken, but what are the different aspects that when you're producing a band convey this sense of heaviness to the listener?
It really, without being repetitive, it comes down to the thing of what comes before it. It's like if you start with a mid-tempo song, to get a heavier feel, you've probably got to slow it down, and you've probably got to give yourself space. You can't. This is why I love the low toms in any recording, because by the time you hit these things, they need to resonate. They've got to shake the room. I mean, I guess again, thinking filmic, you look at something like what was it, Interstellar, with the huge sub church organ stuff going on there. That's heavy. That movie is heavy pretty much all the way through. There are light moments, but it's just, I guess you're just trying to capture something that makes you go inside, have I achieved what I think that is? And it's just unquantifiable. It's such a personal response that, you know, one person's heavy may be going around in a circle pit. I don't know. I've never done that. I certainly wouldn't now. But it's sometimes it's adding those elements. It's like adding some orchestral elements to it.
Yeah.
Talking specifically about the track we've been looking at, you know, as soon as that heavy brass comes in, it's like that shape totally takes you to a different place to where you were earlier. So it's all about contrasts. Yeah.
From the perspective of contrast and these different performances, what are the central challenges of engineering metal music and mixing metal music that differ it from other genres that might also involve guitars and harmonically distorted guitars?
I would say some of the proggier stuff is similar to the metal, and I know there's a massive crossover. When you talk about simple pop music, there's not much time to change things around, so you end up with some pretty specific choices. And you know, if we're talking about EDM, you get the drops and you get those sections, which in themselves are heavy. When you get to metal production and proggy metal, it's about being able to bring in those elements. Where you make a sonic choice to maybe bring in octave pedals on the guitars, or maybe pop in some sub bass on a Taurus bass pedal or something. It's all these things that you can then go, what happens now if we take it away? We can lighten it up. We can prepare for what's happening next. So it's really, I guess, about knowing where you want to get to with the production. And that's a conversation you have to have with the creative people in the bands. If we're talking about band related music, it's like, what is their end result? What are they trying to convey? And then, are we getting there? There's lots of conversation.
From a technology perspective, you've obviously, as I have, witnessed a great change in the technology that's available for producing metal music, and certainly there's genres and performances that are enabled by the technology that we've got. We look at quantization and drum sample reinforcement and replacement, etc. Do you feel that technology can continue to develop, and do you feel that the art of producing metal music will continue to develop, or do you feel that we've reached a sort of a point where it's not going to change much from here?
I think I'd be surprised if there were many more developments. I mean, well, we're constantly surprised by what goes on, but I don't know what else you could foresee as being helpful. But then I started on tape, so who'd have foreseen the ability to use equipment like this reasonably? I don't know. It's a difficult one. I'm quite pragmatic. I feel that technology gets in the way of a lot of conversations. This having a screen in the middle of the room as the center point between the speakers drives me mental, because it should be about shutting your eyes and listening to what's going on. And I think that's a major part. A lot of the older artists that I work with will sit in the room with their eyes shut listening. Then you hear some snoring, and they do. But it's very much about what's happening coming out of the speakers, rather than let's look at and see whether or not that's perfectly aligned. And I think an imbalance can be quite good sometimes as well, to set the listener, you know, to actually attract the listener to something that's happening over there, rather than just this constant wall of perfection going on. Because to me, a lot of the music starts to become almost mono, because it's tracked to perfection, and then people put wideners on to widen it out, and I would just have the two guitarists do what they do, and hopefully that gives you the sense of power and width. And it's the difference in the performances that make everything feel more powerful to me.
That's interesting perspectives, that particularly the emphasis of visualization, and because this concept of perfection, perceived perfection in metal music is something that's quite interesting, is that it's with the increase of speed and this ensemble rhythmic synchronization where everything's locked to the kick drums and everything's very, very metronomic. And
It's basically like dance music with heavy guitars.
yeah,
You know, it really is. You listen to a band like Ginger, you may as well be at a rave. You know, it's of its genre, but I wouldn't call that particular. It's probably not. I don't know what that is, but it's very heavy. But the only thing that keeps people interested in Ginger for me is the fact that Tatiana's got such a great voice, because they're brilliant musicians, but just because they can, does it mean they should? You look at Dream Theater, and you've got Rudess and Petrucci basically playing the same solo together. It's like, great, but you know, what? That's just proving they're really good players. Does that emotionally grab me? No, it's like going to I don't know, going to something in the 70s where probably like Rush gigs, and I love Rush, where everybody was air drumming with Neil because that was the best part of the concert. It's like, no, listen to the storytelling.
sure.
You know, it's just me being a dinosaur, but I think there's something that is so much more real that you can connect with
Yeah.
when it doesn't feel like it's just being gridded, because it's like low-grade data entry, which, to be honest, anybody can do. And I think the people at the top do a fantastic job, but I think there's a middle ground of the technology's enabled a lot of people to do it, and perhaps they're not getting the end goal. I think the technology is driving the production rather than the actual songs and the performances.
I think that's a really interesting point, because there's that old legend about Black Sabbath, which was...
They're probably all true.
They're probably all true, yeah. Which is along the lines of that they're all, in the early days, involved in recreational, shall we say, and that they'd be jamming riffs in a sound check, and the manager, the subsequent day, would be saying, carry on with that song you were riffing on yesterday, and they'd be like, what song?
Yeah.
So apparently he would just take them into any recording studio in whatever city they were, just to get a recording. And as legend has it, all of these recordings just sounded exactly the same as the album, because if you put microphones in front of Black Sabbath, that's how they sounded.
Yeah.
And obviously it's down to the user of modern technology, but I often think about how the Sabbath albums would have sounded had they been recorded in Pro Tools. And obviously,
Well, just listen to 13, I'll tell you. There's two sides to it, and I'll probably forget both of them. But the one side is that because people have been given access to this, so particularly a drummer has been able to have their stuff perfected, and then that goes out on a record, and everybody thinks that's how drummers should play. So they're now attaining that by practice. So it's like, when it took God knows how many years to break the 4-minute mile, and then within 6 months about another 10 people had done it, because it was no longer something that was unattainable. Nowadays you've got people that know that this stuff can be done. So you've got these incredible drummers who can do what drummers couldn't do 30 years ago. So that's driven it, and I think it's a shame. See, I've already forgotten the other point I was going to make, but that is a shame. So it's driven from that point of view. But back in the pre-YouTube days and camera phone days, people used to take their music out and test it out on crowds. I've got bootlegs from the 70s where Pink Floyd played the Wish You Were Here album and the Animals album on the previous tours. So Animals was debuted in its various forms on the Wish You Were Here tour, and they figured out what worked and how to inhabit these songs. So when they go into the studio, suddenly it's like, yes, this is how this is meant to be played. And I think, say Animals is my favourite album as it's well known now. That is the album where Pink Floyd sound like Pink Floyd. And that's a heavy album, heavy in storytelling and darkness. And the same with Black Sabbath. I mean, it's well known their first album was basically their set list. They went into a room probably smaller than this. And then they were told to go away while they mixed it. They probably had a gig in London the following day.
What are your reflections on lo-fi production? So I'm sure, as I don't, you don't particularly enjoy listening to lo-fi productions, or do you? Or do you find lo-fi productions potentially as heavy as higher fidelity productions?
I guess it depends. I think you're taken to a place, aren't you, by memories of music. So you have this connection with a piece of music, and then you listen to it years later and you go, oh my God, that doesn't sound anything like I remember. So Faith No More, Epic, is not a great sounding production from the point of view of, if you took it to today, it would be like, my God, what? That's just like, ugh. But the energy that comes across with that, and we all remember the fish dying in the video, all of that takes you back to a place where that song was absolutely huge, and you get this connection with the time. And like I say, Animals doesn't sound like a modern album at all, but it's the band playing in the room, and I love that kind of stuff. We've got expectations now that are probably so hi-fi that you look back and everything, everybody's like, oh, I wish we could remix that, I wish we could remix that. And it's like, but that wouldn't be the same thing. Wouldn't give you the same response that listening to it the first time did. So
yeah, interesting perspectives about nostalgia and periods of your life, and reflecting on albums that you sometimes go back to and you think, oh, it still sounds as fresh today. Then others, I don't remember this sounding like this, and emotional connections.
There's a lot from the 80s which was just defined by everybody getting access to digital technology, whether it was sequencing technology. I mean, you look at what happened. It's in the Sound City documentary. You've got what's his name, Keith Olsen, opened up a room next door, and you've got this huge hair metal stuff going on, which isn't really hair metal. It's like White Snake and all that stuff. All that going on. Not long after the Sound City stuff, where it was a grubby facility that was just bands playing, and the 80s, I mean, I loved the 80s. It was my teenage years, but it's so defined. The sounds are so defined by what the technology was doing at the time, and it's a real shame. It's like you now hear bands like Europe, right, when they went out on tour and actually started playing maybe 10, 15 years ago, it's like, God, that sounds heavy. Nobody was taking the piss out of the lyrics then, were they? It was like, Europe can actually do it. And it's just an interesting one to see. Again, I'm all for the live experience of when they connect with that audience. That's what makes it so much more real and engaging. And I think there's just so much done in the studio that doesn't even take that into account.
Picking up from that, this idea of the live experience and then capturing it and translating it to the listener, of the albums that you've done, which are the albums that had the most significant challenges that really informed the end product? And how did you get round these challenges in what you were trying to achieve and what the band were trying to achieve?
Well, I think turning it around, I think one of the easiest projects was the album I did with the sort of second incarnation of Sabbath with Dio. So that was written all properly in the studio. Lots of time was taken. Ronnie would be upstairs in his kitchen with a little acoustic guitar, and a CD player, not cassette. And he was working on lyrics and melodies while we were working on the other stuff. And then we'd come together at the end of each day. But by the time we got ready to record, we were out in Los Angeles, and we booked a rehearsal room for a week so they could start playing the songs. And the songs transformed so that when we went to Rockville to record it, we recorded that album in 13 days, top to bottom, because they were ready. And then you take an album where it was very much pulled apart and it was put together piecemeal, like Redeemer of Souls I did for Judas Priest. Now that started with demos all done on the computer. Then it was, we're going to get all the guitars done, and then and Glenn didn't even want to bring the drummer in because he was happy with the drum sound. And I'm like, no, Scott Travis is one of the best drummers out there. What are you talking about? So piecemeal piecing together an album, that took from start to finish 14 months, not 13 days, you know.
And how did that impact the final production? And from the perspective of somebody listening to it without understanding or knowing?
Well, I think it's a very divisive album because there was a very single-minded approach to the guitar sounds. Glenn wanted something very different to previous albums because it was like, let's do something different this time. Let's do something different here. And I guess Richie's first album with the band, not able to push back as much. That was the album that gave me the nervous breakdown. So that's what that did to me. But from the overall aspect of what went on, it was a slog. It was a real hard slog. We did Firepower 3 or 4 years later. That was really straightforward. The band were all there together. I mean, that's what bands are meant to do. They're meant to be in a room, at least making decisions, you know.
And the difference between Redeemer of Souls and Firepower, do you feel one's overproduced? Do you feel, how did it
Well, Snape always overproduces everything. But no, I would say Firepower was much more condensed in the focus of the energy from everybody. Everybody was involved. Whereas Redeemer of Souls was just spread out. It was just, we got a month here to do this, and Rob will come over and do vocals in a month, and it just didn't feel like it was a band. And I think that's why it divides people. It's a different sounding album, but then, I mean, you know, you've got a band that's done 50 years. You're going to win and lose fans along the way, aren't you? You know, I've got 4 favourite Rush albums. I've got 4 Pink Floyd albums. Queen didn't do everything right, you know. I mean, they just changed as they went through. So you're going to pick portions of time which are your favourite. And I copped a load of flack, the death threats and everything from Priest fans who said it wasn't anything like Painkiller. And I'm like, well, thank God for that, you know. Because Judas Priest aren't just Painkiller, you know. So but you don't make records for the fans. You make them for the artists. You make it because these people have got something inside them that they emotively want to put out. Well, you know, you're an artist yourself.
Yeah. Moving more onto the production side of things and some of the concepts, when you're producing and when you're mixing, what are the trade-offs that you're looking at? In other words, with an increased sense of cohesion, is there less clarity? Is there something that you're trying to trade off between? You talk about this idea when you're talking about the Priest album of the energy and the band coming together. There's always this balance between sort of clarity and cohesion, which is a difficult one to manage. And do you have particular approaches to, say, parallel compression or room mics, or separating the guitars and the bass, or the distortion on the bass, these areas of trade-offs that you're looking at?
No, I mean, I have to say I don't use parallel compression. I find it gets messy. I'm very much, I mean, you know, I'd love to be as good as him, but I'm very much the Andy Wallace school of things. Get the kick and the snare working, get the guitars working with that, and then make everything else fit around it. So if the kick and the snare sound brilliant, and the guitars come in, the main rhythms, then that's half the job done. Then it's about getting the vocal in, and everything else has to fit in around that. And I wouldn't even say they're compromises. It's just a case of not being lazy. It's about making, in a mixing point of view, it's about automating anything that is in the way. If that is blocking that, then move it out of the way, or change the frequencies, or do something that separates them, even if it's only for a couple of notes, whatever it takes, because that's one of the benefits of technology. We can automate everything, absolutely everything. So why shouldn't we? And from a recording point of view, I think it's very, very important from day one to have everybody in a room together, because what you tend to find is if everybody's in a room working together, they're bouncing off each other. There are decisions made by a bass player and a drummer being in the same room tracking together that will impact both of their performances. Just an off-the-cuff little lick that the drummer may just go, oh, I liked what he did there, I'm going to just put a little ding ding there or whatever. Suddenly this thing comes to life. There's none of this, we're done with the first verse, right, let's copy and paste that through. It's like, it's all about seeing how the energy goes. And it's at that point that when people work together, you suddenly get this instant gratification of what the song is doing. How does this sound coming out the speakers? And at that point, you're then informed with what you need to do next. Because you've got people who are like, I've got all these ideas for all these extra guitar parts. Do you really feel they need it now? Because at that point, we want some space, and we know that because we've got all this heaviness there. Why don't we just do some stuff in the background that just allows some space, and what the vocalist's doing there needs to have a bit of room. Otherwise, it's just shove everything in and sort it out in the mix afterwards. And, you know.
Staying with that idea, this idea of space, which is something that's a significant challenge usually, from the engineering side through to the mix side, do you have any general principles that you're looking at? Because this idea of get the kick and snare, Andy Wallace approach with the guitars and then fit everything round it. At the recording stage, you've got a guitarist that's got their tonal blueprint.
Yeah.
What at the recording stage, how do you manage that spectral footprint of the bass around that? Are there any principles where you're trying to look, well, the guitars are quite mid-range heavy, so maybe the bass needs to be more in the lows, or this sort of like sonic jigsaw idea?
You sort of just hear what it's doing together. You go, play. Everybody play. And when they're all there together and you say to the guy, at this point, the guitarist has started doing low chugs, how about you don't? You know, maybe you might want to go up an octave. Or you can do something where you say to the bass player, why don't we go up an octave but stick an octave divider underneath it? So suddenly we've still got this sub bass going on, but the main mid-rangey aspect of the bass is up here. And the guitars can fill in this middle region. And then you get them to listen and go, have we compromised your sound? And they're like, no, actually, that doesn't matter because it just sounds great together. As opposed to going down the micro analysis of, you know, should we move this microphone that far, or, you know, how long are we going to take to choose a cab sound? You know, it's I think once you get people invested in the project, they become less anally retentive.
And then when you get to the mix stage and you've captured those sounds and performances,
You ditch half of them.
you did.
I always will record more than I think I need. Because there's an awful lot you can do where if you've got left and right guitars, say you've got two guitarists in the band and you do a left and a right, well, I'll always double both, and then I can do the thing where it feels like the one guitar just wants to come in at the beginning of a section, so I'll just bring up a bit on the left, that's stage left. So a little bit on the left, and then as soon as the other guitar comes in, we'll either pan it back across or we'll drop it down. And so I'm always trying to make sure the energy shift is what I need to hear. So when I'm listening on oratones, which in my place are normally over to one side, just next to each other, so I don't tend to do much mono listening, but it's effectively mono. I can't tell what panning stuff's happening there. I'm just listening to what the energy's doing, so I can go, yeah, something's really dropped there. Right, okay, so I just need to maybe massage these two guitar parts and maybe put a little bit of the other side in. Great, that's the energy I want now. Now, what's it like in stereo? No, I need to just pan them both across and see if I can fill in. Or if while we're tracking that feels like that's happening, I'll just get another part and I'll just choose another sound. We've always got the reamping thing, but I've got to say probably in the last 2 years I've not reamped anything. It's like it's there as an option, but you make the decisions when you record.
Do you have any general principles that you go with where you will, if it's say one guitarist in a band, that you have certain principles, or speed of performance? Do you tend to go double tracked or quad tracked, or any broad principles that you?
No, I think it's just like sometimes they have a preconceived idea that they may want to try something, so I'll always go with that first. So if they say, I'd really like to double all these parts, we'll double it and we'll see what happens. If I don't feel there's enough of a shift in energy between sections, then I'll step in and go, can we just tweak something? Can we just make something happen? So maybe just do another part just for a few bars, or change. I'm always there on pedal boards, putting different pedals in and trying to find something that will create more width, or there's a section that needs to be narrower. That's what you do as you go along. You're trying to get to this point where we used to call it broom handling, where you'd have a 24-track tape and you take it from studio to studio, and you wanted to be able to broom handle the faders up to 0 and have a mix. And that's what I'm trying to achieve every day, is just, can I broom handle that mix and everybody be excited by what's happening?
Therefore, it's rarely the case that you'd ever go with quad-track guitars, or...
Well, I won't do it per se. It's just, what does it feel it needs?
Right, okay.
You know, some of these guitar sounds are so thick.
Yeah. What were the options that were excessive, or what would you have changed in the way that it was recorded or presented to you? Like, for example, the levels of gain on the guitars or something like that.
I thought they were fine. I chose, once I worked out the numbering scheme, which I was a bit slow at, I just chose 1 and 3, 4 and 6, because it was like, they were different performances on different amps, and the 2 different guitar parts they seemed to work together, and I just stuck with it. And then throughout the mix, I don't know what stage I got to in the end, but I was playing with different level changes and whether or not things needed a push, you know. I just found a part, because they were all really well played, so it didn't really matter. It was like, what fits in? Probably if I'd had another 6 days, I'd have started getting into you know, actual automated EQing and stuff to make it fit around the orchestration. I mean, when you say what would I have changed, I'd have loved to have had access to the orchestration, because I was having to do, I ended up splitting them out to left and rights rather than a stereo track, so I could actually play with balances and EQ to feature cellos against violins, because there was some interesting stuff going on with those that I didn't have enough control over.
From the bass perspective, what sort of route did you?
I did. I chose to mainly feature the more aggressive sounding bass 2, I guess. Yeah, I actually laid in some sub bass as well, just so that there was something that I could bring in at certain sections that gave you that weight, the heaviness at the bottom.
Sub bass from?
The keyboard. Just because it was like, the bass is doing something up there, the guitars are doing something up there. What happens if I just have this grounding sub? And I did it the whole way through, and then I just muted it in and out as and when I needed it. When I felt I just wanted a bit more, yeah.
Excellent, because that's really what we wanted, is you to get a producer perspective on the track. What's your broad approach with dynamics? Is it limiters? Is it compression? Is it both? And what's your approach with saturation and analog processing, like tape emulation, Mike?
So on the way in, I tend to use, on certain instruments, I will use 456 tape saturation units. They're the Roger Mayer things. So what I'm looking to do is reduce the amount of peak compared to the RMS. So I don't think, I think digital's brilliant at capturing peaks. It doesn't do anything to help us with RMS. So I like to get at least a little bit of help, and it's very, very subtle. It kind of builds up over the tracking process, but you can get more energy to tape by saturating on the way in, but it's inaudible. It's not distorted. It's just taming the peaks. And I don't think you can do that with compression. Compression always has an overshoot, whatever happens. Even with look ahead, it just does this thing that doesn't feel right to me. On the dynamics side of things, as dynamic as possible. I want to hear the highs and the lows. It's about leaning into the speakers and experiencing that. You know, I don't want everything to be at the same level, because it just ends up being uninteresting to listen to. It's meant to take you on that journey, because if there's no quiet bits, the heavy bits don't matter. If it's all one level, it's just, yeah, great. So compression wise, I do use it, but I'm very picky. And mix saturation, I very rarely get, unless it's a specific effect, I'd very rarely go much more than using something like Crane Song Phoenix just to give some high harmonics.
You wouldn't ever use heat or anything like that?
No, because I haven't got enough control over it. That's why I ended up with a Crane, because it's the same process effectively, but I tend to want to go in and deal with the stuff that needs dealing with. Now with my session, I actually create a submixer within Pro Tools, which has got a console plugin on each set of 14 stem channels. And they are all set to have a little bit of non-linearity. So they're Brainworks BX things, and they're not doing anything except basically making the left and the right a bit different. So it just makes the mix, it's almost like a summing bus kind of treatment. I don't do any saturation on the mix bus. In fact, the only thing I've got on the mix bus is a Townhouse compressor. It's basically an SSL compressor.
Right.
And I mix into that, and I know if I'm hitting it too hard. I don't want any more than 2 or 3 dB of compression. I want this thing to be as wide-ranging and as open as possible. And I put the automation to massive amounts of work to make that happen. Again, like that sub bass thing, if I felt that was too much, and just by pulling it back, it just backs off the main compression, I'm not going to do the filter on the side chain. I'm going to make sure that I'm not hitting the compressor, because otherwise you're just transferring the problem somewhere else. And I like to get it as dynamic as possible. And then I have severe words with mastering people who try to make it too loud. It's meant to be as loud as it is without destroying the fidelity to me. And I know I'm sort of old-fashioned in that respect, but I can't listen to a lot of modern productions because it's just like Jacob Marley's chains being jangled. There's so much fast attack, fast release going on in mastering to try and get these levels up. That I think people have lost the ability to actually just do what's right for the song.
Interesting. And along that route where you're certainly not over compressing, you tend not to compress the guitars?
Funnily enough, on this one, I did. I was getting into about 4 or 5 hours of automation until I thought, oh, I'll try the new toy, which is Massenburg's dynamic range controller. And that has this detector circuit that just works the way we perceive dynamics. So I was able to change the difference between the I didn't use multi-band compression. I just used the dynamic range controller to sort of reduce the difference between the highs and the lows, and it did enough that I maybe got 1 or 2 moves on that. I tried it with the arouser, which is the distressor. Nothing like it. It just sounded compressed.
So you didn't do it on the lows, it was a broadband?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah. You need a degree in something to work out what's in George Massenburg's head, but this thing is ridiculous. It's very, very unusual, but it does that thing of basically controlling the dynamic range, and it enables you to settle stuff in a mix. You can take 18 dB out of a vocal and not hear it. It's insane, but then so's he.
Massenburg, what's it called?
Dynamic range controller. The DRC2. Yeah.
Wow, it's
Well, he's been developing it for about 15 years.
I see.
His 8900 was the hardware unit back in the 90s.
But this is software.
Yeah.
Oh, I can feel
It's ridiculous.
I can feel a shopping trip coming on.
Yeah, you need to watch the videos and try and work it. It took me 4 hours to work out how it worked.
And he'll obviously insist you've got to use it at 96 or, you know.
Nah, 48 all along.
Yeah.
I was quite pleased this came. I think it was 48, wasn't it?
44.1.
Was it? I probably changed it to 48.
You prefer 48?
Everybody uses 48 outside of the UK.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's a bloody nuisance when I get 44 ones.
Yeah, fairly sure it's 44.1.
It might be.
Just because of the video side of things.
Right.
Is that what you prefer? Because remaining at 48 for rendering it out? Or any
No,
particular reason?
I've just always, I suppose I did a lot of stuff with Americans, so it's always been 48.
Yeah.
And nobody records high res at 88.2, so why would you do 44.1?
Sure.
No, I have these arguments with mastering engineers. I get told off for 48K. And I'm like, yeah, but you record at 96. Yeah, but you know, we know sample rate convey. Oh, shut up, it doesn't matter.
This idea of the dynamics of the mix and giving it space and letting it breathe and not just slamming it, it's quite interesting. What approach do you look at with the bass then? Generally with compression, I appreciate that it depends on the mix and the context, but are you trying to really just get that mix just to sit there without changing in level, or do you still look like a lot of dynamics in the bass, particularly given that the guitars are very dynamically stable, usually because of the harmonic distortion?
Yeah, again, I just listen to it and go, is it hitting me the way I think it should, or is something wrong? And that can take you down a rabbit hole. But you know, you can use sections where the bass maybe does a lick and you just want to feature the more distorted bit just for that lick and then automate it back. So you're balancing two things. That's another. I'm one of these Nazis about control surfaces. You cannot balance two things with a mouse. You can't do that with a mouse. So you're constantly doing this serial functionality of change that, change that, change that, change that. Whereas I want to be able to shut my eyes and go, oh, that's hitting me better. And even if it's, again, just for a couple of notes, I'll just punch that in and do that move. So I'm listening for, I call it problems. Automation is a problem solver, but they're not really problems, they're creative decisions. But automation has always allowed us to do that. And it's, you know, there's a lot of people that still work heavily by moving faders. I mean, when people work in live sound, they're reacting to what's coming off the stage. One of my greatest gigs that I saw in the last few years was Opeth, because the guys rocked up, they had all their shit down on stage, and the front of house guy, he wasn't there with a waves package or anything, he just had a show file that had his subgroups, and he spent the entire night just pushing up solos and just featuring vocal parts. It was all mixing, it was reacting to what was happening. And that's what I want to do, I want to react to what's coming out the speakers.
So this idea of different forms of heaviness and heaviness in different genres, you mentioned classical music. Obviously heaviness can be present in classical music, and do you feel it's to do with the same frequency content or the same sort of sense of intensity with the performances, or what are the correlations? Because classical music does come up a lot, and obviously there's these virtuoso performances in metal music that's also there in classical. What do you feel the links are from a sonic perspective of metal music and classical music?
I think intensity is a good word. I think so. So there's two. I would rate probably, again, very divisive, but Hans Zimmer. I would say a lot of his stuff is very classical sounding. So let's put him on to one side so I don't forget about him, put a pin in it. Mozart's Requiem Mass is one of the most powerful pieces of music. It starts off with some, it goes from very, very subtle vocal, choral stuff to absolutely huge funeric stuff. It's a Requiem Mass. I mean, it's huge. It's got everything that stretches the frequency ranges, the dynamics. It's a very, very powerful thing. I mean, I'm lucky I've seen it a couple of times performed live, and it is just like, wow, this is incredible. And it's not the Sturm und Drang of bombast. It's just beautiful writing to huge. And that's one aspect of it. That's where classical music can be very powerful. You can also do the things like 1812 Overture, where that is just Sturm und Drang. With Zimmer, I remember going to see one of his shows, and they went through the entire, they did this thing where it was the two superheroes. It was Wonder Woman and Man of Steel. So that was part of the suite. The Wonder Woman part was like being at a metal gig. It was so heavy because it was the way he'd arranged it. Now, Man of Steel is just big. It's got the kind of drums. He had kettle drums and all that stuff going. But when it transitioned into the Wonder Woman suite, it was like, holy shit, this is just massive. It was powerful. Now, again, that correlation, you're seeing it live, there's a big light show going on, but it was a metal gig as far as I was concerned. And that's where I think the synergy between metal music and classical is, because I alluded to it earlier with the pop music side of things. You don't get time to explore movements, whereas in metal, I'm in the middle of mixing an album. It's a 45-minute doom metal album. They said it's not a bunch of songs, it's one piece. It's 5 pieces. But you have to start and go through the entire thing to make it work as a listening experience. That's the dynamic journey you're going on. And that's got the lights and shades. There's one section where it's just basically a bass with some chorus and reverb on it with a very quiet vocal. And then the next section is huge doomy guitars with sub-synth stuff. So again, there's all these different, all these things that create the heaviness. And as I say, like EDM, Ginger, that's effectively EDM with heavy guitars and bass. It really is, because it's so programmed. It's got bass drops in it. You know, it's like there's so much crossover now. I mean, whenever it was we were at Hull, where everybody was subdividing genres, it's like it's probably got even worse now. You know, but why do you have to pigeonhole it? I always get them wrong. You know, I don't know what metalcore and doom. I just don't care. It's like, do I like that? And
is it good or is it
yeah, does it make me go yeah? Or,
2 types of music, good and bad, or heavy and metal.
Yeah, exactly.
Fascinating stuff, Mike. Are we good to have a listen to your mix and look at some of your processing and mix approaches?
Yeah, careful what you wish for.
Fantastic.